Hello and welcome back. This is Jennifer and thank you for visiting. So today I'm sharing with you a way to add foil touches to your projects, and you do not need a special foil machine or laminator to do so. This is really easy and a great way to add those shiny details. I have two different ways to demonstrate using them. The second one's actually my favorite way, but the first one is super easy, so I thought I'd start with that. All of today's cards are featuring a new kit from Altenew. This is their Craft Your Life for August 2021, and it's called Lush Garden. Now, this is a kit you can just buy as a kit, or you can subscribe and get it every month at a discount. Now, this kit has a lot in it, and they're all tools that can be used over and over again, which is the reason I really like them. This is their second kit. If you want to see their first kit, I will link to a video showing that up here in the top right. So this kit includes a 6x8 stamp set, the one you see here. It's a beautiful layering stamp set, and there are circles around the images that go together, but it does come with a guide with suggestions on card designs and also the key to getting the layering just right. You'll see me layer these stamps later in this video. Now, the nice thing about this stamp set is also that you can just use the outline alone and color it however you want, or you can use the layering images alone and skip the outline, or you can use them together. There are also coordinating dies and a coordinating stencil, and you'll see the stencil demonstrated in this video. But what's nice about it is it has the solid flower right up to the stamped outline. So say you want to put glitter gel over your entire flower, you can use the stencil for that, or you can do quick coloring that way. But here's the best part about the kit. It also includes this 6x6 3D floral embossing folder that's beautiful, and coordinating layering dies that line up perfectly with that embossing folder. So you can do an embossed panel and then add coloring to it, and it's just beautiful. And I will demonstrate that with my first card example. Please keep in mind that Altenew is really good about providing guides to help you line things up, and also markings on their stencils so you can get it just right. So you may not be able to see those in the video because they're hard to show there, but do know that they are on the products to make it easy to use. Okay, let's get started with my first card example. Now, while I'm creating this background, I'll actually create two, and I'll be saving one for a later card. Now we'll start by doing the embossing with the embossing folder and then adding the color, and we'll do the foil details at the end. So here is the 3D embossing folder included in the kit, and I'm putting white cardstock in it. I'm running this through my Spellbinders Platinum 6. For this particular machine, I found you just use the embossing folder with the cardstock and one clear plate on top. Now this embossing folder works with all the different machines. You'll just need to follow the instructions. And there you can see the beautiful 3D embossed floral image. Absolutely gorgeous. I'm going to go ahead, as I mentioned, and make two of these. So you'll see me color two as we go. That is so I have a spare for later on. So now I have the layering stencils that line up with this embossed panel. I'll take the first one, and you'll be able to see how it lines up with the raised areas the embossing folder created. When I hold it up in the light, you can kind of see it here. In real life, it's very easy to line up. It kind of pops into place. Now, if you wanted to, you could apply one color over this whole area, but I wanted to make this very colorful and use a lot of colors of inks. So I will mask off parts of the stencil so that I only color one flower pink, another flower yellow, and so on and so forth. I have my ink stand here that holds my ink pad as I do my ink blending. I have Altenew Crisp Dye Ink, which is beautiful color selection, and then an Altenew small blending brush. I apply a light amount of ink first, and then I go a little heavier handed towards one edge just to give that variation of color. I did one panel. Now I'll come to the second panel. Remember how I said I'm doing two so I have a spare? And I'll color this one the same way. I just wanted to demonstrate it's easy to do multiples at once. I have the masking tape lined up. I have the ink out. I might as well do more than one. Now, as far as inks to use for this technique, you can use absolutely any inks you may have, and you can use any inking tool you may have. It really doesn't matter at all. We're just applying color over the raised areas of the embossing folder. Okay, so after I've got the first flower done, I can wipe it clean with a dry cloth and remove the stencil. Now I'm moving to the next open area on the stencil so I can color the next flower a different color. Again, if you want to save time, just do the entire stencil the same color, and you would have a cluster of flowers with just a few different colors. But I really like to add as much color as possible. So this time I've masked off some of the openings so that I can do this little cluster of flowers up here on the top right, a blue color. Notice that I turn my blending brush in one direction and then I turn it the other direction too. That helps you to get more color in all the nooks and crannies and get better coverage. I then go a little bit heavier handed towards one part of it, in that case towards the center, just so it doesn't all look the same. By making it darker in some areas and lighter in others, you give the look of dimension, which really adds to that embossing that we have behind this. It's got that raised embossing, and now the ink will help to make it stand out. I've moved the masking tape so that I can do a different flower here in yellows. One of the reasons I do use Altenew inks a lot for layering stencils and layering stamps is their inks are available in sets of 4, a light, medium, dark, and extra dark of the same color. So if you want to build up color through layering stencils or layering stamps, it's really handy. They're also available in cubes, but again, you can use whatever colors you have here. You could just use one ink pad and do it light for the first layer and then a little bit darker for the second layer, just by adding more of the ink. So I'm still on that first stencil and I'm just moving the tape around so that I can do each of the flowers a different color. Now I'm going to skip ahead a bit because this is all the same process, just inking up different areas, and move on to the second stencil. But first, let's look at the results after finishing the first stencil. You can see how the raised areas are starting to have color on them, which really makes it stand out. The second stencil is a little bit different. There are different sections to it. You can leave it as a whole stencil and just mask off different areas. But what I'm going to do is a little bold. I'm actually cutting the different areas from the stencil. There are markings on the stencil, so it's easy to figure out. But by doing this, I can make sure that I'm able to easily just ink up the parts I want. So this big area here still lines up with our background, and this small area here lines up with the flowers there towards the bottom middle. Again, the guide is very helpful in figuring this out, but you can also just look through the stencil and very easily see where it lines up with the embossed background. Now I know somebody's going to ask if it's better to do the inking before the embossing. I highly recommend doing the embossing folder first because it helps you with lining things up. At this point, I wanted some dark purple towards the center of those flowers, so I used my Altenew Detail Ink Blending Tool. This is a very small brush tip that's great for getting areas like this. So I just put a bit of darker ink there towards the center of those flowers, and it really adds quite a bit to it. So now I'm going to the other part of that second stencil and lining it up with our embossed background, and I'll ink up those different areas too. Again, this is really easy to do as you're looking through the stencil and following the embossed pattern in the background. I'm not going to show all of this because it's very repetitive. You're just inking up everything that has a raised area after that embossing folder. Then after completing the second stencil, you can come in with the third stencil, and again, it'll be very easy to line up, and you can complete all of the inking of all the raised areas. So here is a look at that background. Look how beautiful that is. Lots of detail to it. I'll give you a closer look later, but let's first apply some gold detail to this using foil. This is super easy and doesn't require a fancy machine. However, it does require a product that makes it easier, but I will talk about other suggestions that might work for you if you don't have this one. Now the product I'm using today is ThermoWeb Deco Foil Transfer Gel Duo. I've done a video with this in the past, and I will link to it up here on the top right so you can learn more. But this product allows you to add foil or flocking material from ThermoWeb onto your products without the need for a fancy machine. You could use a laminator with this, but I will be demonstrating it with a die cut machine. That's why it's called Duo. You can use either a die cut machine for pressure or a laminator for pressure, and this works great. So just bear with me as we demonstrate this, and I'll talk about more things you can do. I have a brush here that is clean, and I dried it completely, and I only use this brush for this technique. You want to be sure to clean it off well when you're done. I'm putting a little bit of the Duo gel in the center of the flowers. You do not need a lot for this, and you won't really see it. It'll be a little shiny, but it's clear, so you won't see much of it. That's okay. Believe it or not, you don't need much for this foiling technique to work. So I'm just using the brush, the side of the brush, the center of the brush to apply different amounts to the center of each flower. You could do brush stroke backgrounds if you wanted to. You could do anything with this product. You can use it over as a stencil if you want to. I have another thinner brush here that allows me to get even more detail. If you do not have this product, you can try using a liquid glue pen and doing the same technique with that, which I have demonstrated in a video, which I'll link to on the top right here. But I really like this Duo gel because you can use it for details like this, or for larger backgrounds over a stencil or like a large brushed background. Okay, so now that I've applied that, I'll clean off my brush, close up my jar, and I'm going to set this aside to dry for about a half hour to an hour. Again, I didn't put the product on very thick. Now once it's dry, it's time to add the foil. Now the type of foil you need for this is Deco foil. There are foils in so many different finishes and colors, you wouldn't believe it. There's even flocking material that would work for this. Now this foil is different than I use with my foiling machines, such as the Glimmer machine. These are Deco foils that have been around for a long time. They work on laser printed products. There are many uses for it, and I will link to a video with more information on that. But in this case, we're applying the foil using pressure from a die cut machine. I'm using my Platinum 6, but you can use whatever you have. And you will put your paper and your foil in whatever sandwich you normally use for cutting with a wafer thin die. So I have my platform, my clear cutting plate, my embossed panel that has that ThermoWeb Duo gel on it. Then I'm laying my foil on top of it with the foil's pretty side facing upwards. So remember, at the center of all those flowers, I have that Duo gel. But I'm going to lay the foil on top of it, pretty side facing up. And I like to put one cardstock shim on top of that just to keep it smooth. Then I put my clear cutting plate on top and run it back and forth. So all we're doing here is adding pressure. And the pressure from this will make the foil stick to wherever we put that Duo gel, which is just in the center of the flowers. All right, so now we'll take it out, remove the foil, which you can reuse all those pieces as many times as you want, and look at that. We have foil in the center of our flowers. Now remember, this was an embossed background. We used an embossing folder on it. We kind of smushed it there, right? So I'm going to put it back into the folder. Easy to do. It just lines up by looking through it. Line it back up with the embossing folder, pops in place, then run it through my die cut machine again, just like we did before. The cool thing about this is it adds the embossed texture back to it, but it also adds some texture to our foil. So you'll notice here at the center of the flowers, there's like a texture to the foil. Isn't that beautiful? Very easy to do. And I have another method of this to show in my next example. So this is a great way to add foil to different areas of your project, even with embossing folders. You don't need to do anything else to this. That foil will stay put just fine. But keep in mind, if you do have a laminator, you could use a laminator to apply the heat and pressure to make that foil stick to the Duo gel. That's why it's called Duo. You can either use a laminator or a die cut machine. I do the die cut machine because it's easier. So I trimmed that panel down to be 4 by 5 1/4, and now we'll assemble it onto a card. I have 3 pieces of scrap white cardstock that are slightly smaller, so these are about 3 3/4 inches by about 5 inches. I'm gluing those 3 panels together, and then I'll glue this onto the back of our embossed panel. This just gives it some dimension. I like to add those layers of dimension to make the card kind of look more substantial, to stand out, and I feel it makes a big difference. Once I have those layers glued to the back, we can add this to our card. My card today is a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding gold note card. I made this from gold mirror cardstock. And so the front and the back of the card are gold, but the inside is white because it's a white core cardstock. So you can see a little bit of gold trim around the outside edge. I did also cut a smaller white panel to add to the inside, just to give it some stability and strength, since there's so much weight on the front of the card. The rest of this card was very simple. I used the new Altenew's Fancy Hugs die, which I promise you'll be seeing a lot in my videos because I use their Fancy Hello die a lot already, so I'm excited about this option. I die cut that 3 times from black cardstock and glued it together for stack dimension and added it right onto our background. I also white heat embossed with love onto a black cardstock strip, and that is from the stamp set in the kit. I did add a few gold baubles from Trinity stamps into the background, and that helps draw attention to the foiling that we added at the center of the flowers. I love that gold foil and the texture that you get by using the duo gel, the gold foil, and the embossing folder together. And even if you didn't do the gold foiling, you can see the beautiful detail that you get by using this Altenew embossing folder and layering stencils together to create that colorful textured background. And again, as I mentioned, if you do not have that duo gel, you can try using a liquid glue pen to create a little sticky areas at the center of the flowers. Let that dry, then apply the gold foil, run it through your die cut machine, and you'll get a similar look. The duo gel does work better, but you can use that technique as I demonstrated in the video on the top right corner. Okay, now it's time to share with you my favorite way to add gold detail to either stamped images or die cuts. This gives a beautiful result in real life, and it's super easy to do. It also works with a lot of different stamps. So I'm using the stamp set that's in the kit that I showed you at the beginning of this video. I am starting by stamping the outline of the 2 flowers in the kit and a bunch of the leaves. Now I wanted 4 each of the different flowers. So I cut a piece of cardstock in half, and I'm stamping in the top corner, rotating it in my MISTI stamping tool and stamping it again, and doing that on the 2 halves. So I have 4 of the large flowers. Now I could have done this one at the same time, but didn't think of it, but I have the other flower and a leaf that I'm stamping next to it. So I'm putting as much as I can onto this cardstock panel. This is a great way to save time and allow you to make multiple cards or save additional pieces for later on. Now, when I'm creating a card like today's card, I have 2 large flowers on the card, but I want more leaves than that. So I usually want maybe 5 or 6 leaves to go with 2 flowers together. So that's why you see me coming in and stamping additional leaves in the open area in the middle. But it saves a lot of time by stamping it, then rotating the paper and stamping it again, because you can see how quickly I was able to get all of these images and use up all the space on the cardstock. Now in this example, I'm stamping with Altenew black pigment ink, my favorite black ink for crisp stamping. This is the Obsidian black pigment ink. Once I'm done, I can come in with the layering images. So this is the solid most area of the largest flower, and I just line it up with the outline image, close the door on my stamping tool, and we can start stamping. I'm using the lightest color of ink for this, which is a super light blue. For the second layer, I'll use a slightly darker, and for the third layer, I'll use the darkest color. I will go and do this light color for all 4 flowers so that I don't have to switch them out each time. You can see how this can be a pretty quick process to do. After stamping those, I can move to the first layer of the other flower and stamp a light purple ink on this. It's super light, kind of hard to see in the video. I will stamp it on one flower, rotate, and stamp it on another, and then do the same thing on the other panel. Now there are a lot of leaves, so I will do the first layer in a light like lime colored ink on some of the leaves. Then I'll do the first layer more of an olive ink on some of the other leaves, just so that each of my leaves has a slightly different color, which will allow the card to have a little bit more interest. Okay, so once I did the first layer of all the flowers and leaves, I can come in with the second layer of the large flower and use a slightly darker blue ink. And I will link to the different blue, purple, and green inks I used from Altenew below in case you wanted to check those out. This collection of blues is definitely my favorite. It's such a beautiful combo. So after doing the second layer, I can come in with the third layer and use my darkest color for that. This is the layer that just provides some dark details onto the flower. So I did all of the stamping following the instructions in the Altenew guide, and once I'm done, I have these beautiful florals. However, remember there is a coordinating stencil for this that lines up right to the outside outline edge. So if you want to, you can add a little more color to this, or even like a glitter gel or clear embossing to make it shiny, anything you want. I'm just putting a light amount of light blue ink over the entire blue flower just to make it a little bit darker. With this particular layering flower stamp set, it leaves some areas white, like a bright highlight, but by doing this, you can soften it a little bit by adding a little bit of blue ink. And I'll do a little bit of purple to the purple flower and a little bit of green ink over all the leaves. So having this coordinating stencil is very handy to have. Once I have my flowers and leaves completed, it's time for the fun part, and that is adding the gold foil detail along the edges. This looks amazing in real life and is very easy to do. You can do this with or without a coordinating stencil, and I'll demonstrate both ways. First, let's start with our blue flower, and I'm lining up the coordinating stencil since I have it. Again, you don't need to have it. I will tape this in place, and I again have that Deco Foil Duo Gel that I showed you earlier, and a paintbrush. I will apply a very light amount of ink just to some of the petals. Now you could get really detailed and paint this in certain areas. I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible, so I'm just putting a little bit towards some of the petal edges. And the handy part of having the stencil is it keeps me inside of the lines, but you really don't need to. So I'm kind of pulling it from the stencil edge kind of in towards the center of the flower, just applying a little bit, a very light amount. And again, you'll want to wash your stencil and close the jar as soon as you're done. I can then remove the stencil and set that aside to dry. I will do the same thing with the other blue flower. Once you're done, you will want to clean your stencil off. You don't want the Duo Gel to dry on there. I just find that if I put it in water, in a bowl of water right away, I can then go back and clean it later when I'm done crafting. Another option is to just use a baby wipe to clean it up right away when you're done, as you see me doing here. Okay, after doing the blue flowers, it's time to do the purple flowers. Again, just applying a light amount of ink over some of the petal edges. I decided not to do the flower centers like I did on the other example, just to show you a different option. Now for the leaves, I didn't bother with the stencil. I thought it was easy enough to kind of start at the tip of the petal or of the leaf and pull the brush towards the center. So you'll see me do that a few times here. I start at the tip of the leaf and kind of pull towards the center. All I'm really doing here is adding some gold highlights to the edges of our petals and leaves. So once I've done that, again, you won't see it very much. It'll just look a little wet. I'll set it aside to dry for a half hour to an hour. Then we can apply the foil. So now I have the same foil from before, a gold Deco foil. You could use different specialty ones from Deco foil. They have so many options, so many colors, but I thought I'd just go with basic gold. I put my cardstock in my die cut machine that has the Deco foil on it, the foil pretty side facing up on top, then a cardstock shim, then the cutting plate, and run it back and forth. So this is the same sandwich I would use if I was just using a wafer thin die and a piece of cardstock. We're not cutting anything, we're just applying pressure. And then you can pull the foil off and you'll see gold on the edges. Now it looks like big gold clumps on the petals right now, but we're going to fix that. I'm going to show you a few different ways you can fix it. One way is to use a craft knife and use the sharp edge to kind of scrape from the inside towards the edge. That will kind of roughen it up and make it look a little bit smoother going towards the edge, kind of just like a bit of a gold foil gradient there. So you can kind of scrape some of the way with a craft knife. And if any of your foil is outside the lines of the petal, you can scrape that away with your craft knife too. But another option to kind of soften the edge of that foiling is to use a sanding block, pulling it from the center out, and that kind of softens that inside edge to give you more of a blend. So there you could see the before, then I'll do the sanding block on that, and then the after. So it just kind of softens the harsh edges. And here's a closer look. Look how beautiful that gold foil detail is on the edges of the petals. It kind of fades in towards the center. Absolutely gorgeous. Now let's do some foiling on the purple flowers and the leaves. Remember, we did add the Deco foil to those too. So you can run multiple pieces through at once. I do like putting that cardstock shim on top just so that we keep our foil nice and smooth and add a little extra pressure. Now those look a little bit funny right now because they're such harsh clumps of foil. You could, as I showed you, use the craft knife or the sanding block. Another option is a mono sand eraser. You're just kind of roughing up the inside edge of the foil. I'm keeping the outside edge nice and bright and full. This just makes it have a softer transition to the stamping. So there are many things you can do with this, but I feel like using the craft knife definitely is the easiest and gives the best results, but you can try whatever tool you have to kind of soften those edges. So you can see the beautiful gold foil detail at the tips of those petals. And just a few last examples, we have our leaves. These had big areas or clumps of gold foil, so I used the mono sand eraser to soften it, and then I went outside of the lines, so I just used a craft knife to clean it up. And you can see the gorgeous results. And then of course we can use the coordinating dies to cut all of those out. So I finished these cards off. They were very simple. For example, for this one, I have all of my gold foiled flowers and leaves right at the center. The background is white cardstock that I used the embossing folder I showed you earlier on, so it just adds a little bit of texture. And then I added all of that onto a blue note card. I did add some gold baubles around it just to kind of pull attention to the gold foil details. And then I added a simple sentiment in the center. It's white heat embossed on a black cardstock strip. I didn't want to cover too much of those flowers as I really like the gold detail, so I kept the sentiment strip simple. Now I still had some flowers and leaves left over, so I did a second card. For this one, I added the Fancy Hugs die cut in the center. Those are 3 black die cuts glued together for dimension and then glued right onto the flowers. I did add some gold baubles around it, and that white background is featuring a new Altenew embossing folder. Just gives some dimension. I like embossing folders with white cardstock because it adds interest to the background but doesn't distract from the focal point or the center of the card. And then I added that again onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch blue note card. So you can use these foiling detail tricks with whatever stamps or dies you may have. I encourage you to try it. It's a great way to use up those deco foils you may have in your collection. And again, if you don't have the Duo Gel, try any kind of liquid glue pen, but I do recommend that Duo Gel because you can use it in many ways. And again, at the end here, I'll link to some other ideas for that product. If you're interested in anything I use today, I do link it below in my YouTube description. Last time this kit sold out really fast, so if you are interested in it, I do encourage you to check it out right away. They do get more in stock, but all of these products are exclusive to the kit. Now, also, if you want some more ideas, I have the videos at the end that I mentioned. You can also go to my blog where I have much more information and you're able to bookmark any of these projects for future reference. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. You have a wonderful day and we'll see you soon.